You want to marry him?
Yes, Dad. Daniel is the man I love.
A janitor? Emily, have you completely lost your mind?
Sir, I may not have much money, but
Don't you dare explain yourself to me!
Emily, you were raised to marry into a respectable family, not bring a janitor into ours.
His job doesn't determine his worth.
Then choose him.
I already have.
Fine, then get out of my house!
Dad.
From this moment on, you're no daughter of mine. You'll come crawling back when that man can't give you the life you were born to have.
My name is Emily, and I am 32 years old. I was born into a family that had never worried about money, reputation, or the next meal. Growing up, I lived in a beautiful estate outside Boston, where my parents entertained executives, politicians, lawyers, and other influential people. My father, Richard, owned a successful property development company, while my mother, Margaret, managed several charitable foundations. From childhood, I was taught that our family name meant something. We dressed carefully, spoke carefully, and associated with people who could open doors. I never questioned that world until I met Daniel. I first noticed him in the lobby of an office building where I had gone for a meeting. He was wearing a simple gray uniform, pushing a cleaning cart across the marble floor. He smiled when I accidentally dropped my folder. "You dropped something," he said, picking up the papers. I thanked him, and he walked away without trying to impress me. That small moment stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I saw him several times. We began talking. Daniel was thoughtful, funny, intelligent, and surprisingly well-read. He never pretended to be wealthy. He never apologized for being a janitor. And unlike many of the men my parents introduced to me, he listened when I spoke. Eventually, I fell completely in love with him. When I finally told my parents, I expected disappointment. I wasn't prepared for outrage. My father stared at me as though I had announced that I was leaving the country forever. "A janitor?" he asked. I nodded. "You're telling me you're going to marry a man who cleans offices?" "He's a good man, Dad." My mother quietly asked whether Daniel had any family money. When I said no, her expression changed. They investigated him. They learned that he rented a small apartment, had modest savings, and came from an ordinary working-class family. To them, that was enough to make him unacceptable. My father gave me one final chance. End this relationship, Emily, and we can forget this ever happened. I refused. His voice became cold. "If you marry him, you will no longer be my daughter." I had never heard my father speak to me that way. I spent that night crying, hoping he would change his mind. He didn't. On the morning of my wedding, nobody from my family came. Not my parents. Not Olivia. Not James. I walked into a small church, wearing a simple white dress I had bought myself. Daniel stood waiting for me in a dark suit. His eyes filled with tears when he saw me. "You're sure?" he whispered. I smiled through my own tears. I've never been more sure of anything. We exchanged our vows with only a few friends present. Afterward, Daniel held my hand as we walked outside. I knew I had lost my family that day, but I also knew I had chosen the man I loved. That evening, in the tiny apartment that would become our first home, I sat beside Daniel on our worn sofa. For the first time, there was no mansion, no family security, and no safety net waiting behind me. There was only us. Daniel squeezed my hand. "One day," he said quietly, "your family will understand why you chose me." I looked at him and believed him. I just didn't know how long we would have to wait. The first morning of our marriage, I woke up before sunrise to the sound of Daniel quietly preparing for work. Our apartment was small enough that I could hear every movement from the bedroom. There was no housekeeper knocking on my door, no driver waiting outside, and no breakfast prepared by someone else. There was just Daniel, making coffee in our tiny kitchen. I smiled when I saw him. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he teased. I laughed. For the first time in my life, I was responsible for everything in my home. At first, I struggled. I had grown up surrounded by comfort, so learning to stretch a paycheck was humbling. Daniel never complained. He worked long hours as a janitor during the day, then came home tired and spent his evenings studying business ideas on an old laptop. I began noticing something unusual about him. He paid attention to everything. While cleaning offices, he noticed how companies wasted money maintaining their buildings. He saw maintenance problems being ignored until they became expensive emergencies. One evening, he spread several papers across our kitchen table. "I think businesses need a better way to manage building maintenance," he said. I looked at the notes covering the table. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Almost a year." He explained that he wanted to create a small company that would connect commercial buildings with reliable maintenance workers and use simple technology to track repairs before they became costly. It sounded ambitious, but I believed in him. Daniel used nearly all his savings to launch the business. His first attempt failed. The website barely worked, and the few companies he approached rejected him. One manager even laughed at him. "You're a janitor trying to sell businesses a maintenance system?" Daniel came home that night looking defeated. I found him sitting silently at the kitchen table. "They were right," he whispered. I sat beside him. "No, they weren't." He looked at me. "You don't know that. I know you." That was enough to make him smile. He tried again. This time, he found 2 small property managers willing to test a system. For a few weeks, everything looked promising. Then one of them canceled. The other stopped paying. We fell behind on our rent. I sold a few pieces of jewelry I had kept from my old life. Daniel hated seeing me do it. "I'll replace everything," he promised. "I don't need jewelry," I told him. "I need you to keep going." He kissed my forehead. Then he went back to work. Months passed. His business remained small, but Daniel became more determined. He started networking with building managers, attending industry events, and learning everything he could about commercial property technology. One night, he returned home carrying a folder. "I have something." I looked up from the couch. "What happened?" "A property group wants to test our system across 12 buildings." My heart jumped. "That's huge." It could be. For the first time, I saw something different in his eyes. Not certainty. Hope. The trial went better than anyone expected. Within weeks, Daniel's system helped the company identify maintenance problems before they became expensive repairs. The property group offered him a much larger contract. Then another company called. Then another. Our tiny dining table slowly disappeared beneath contracts, invoices, and business plans. Daniel eventually hired his first 2 employees. Then 5. Then 10. But despite everything changing around us, he still woke up before dawn. He still remembered where he came from, and he still treated every employee with respect. One morning, while I was making breakfast, Daniel's phone rang. He answered quietly. I watched his expression change. His eyes widened. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he looked at me. "They want to invest in us." For the first time, I realized my husband's dream might actually become something much bigger than either of us imagined. Within a year, Daniel's small company had moved from our cramped apartment into a modest office downtown. The first time I walked through those glass doors, I stopped for a moment. Employees were everywhere. People who had once called Daniel for small maintenance jobs were now working for him. He had gone from pushing a cleaning cart through office buildings to running a company that served them. But Daniel never behaved as though he had become important. He still arrived early. He still knew employees by their first names. And whenever someone asked about his beginnings, he never hid the fact that he had once been a janitor. "I learned the business from the bottom," he would say. His company expanded into several states. Then it expanded into Canada. Within a few years, Daniel had developed a nationwide property technology and maintenance company that was worth far more than either of us had imagined. We moved into a beautiful home, but Daniel refused to turn it into another version of my childhood mansion. He wanted a comfortable life, not a life built around impressing people. We traveled occasionally, donated to community programs, and invested carefully. Most importantly, we never contacted my family. I sometimes wondered about them. I wondered whether my father had ever asked about me. I wondered whether my mother regretted what happened. But pride kept me from calling. Then one afternoon I saw my father on television. He was being interviewed about his company's latest property development. He looked older, more tired, still confident, but not as untouchable as I remembered. I watched the interview until the reporter mentioned that the company had recently lost several major contracts. I felt something tighten in my chest. I didn't know then how serious the situation had become. Over the next year, things deteriorated quickly. My father's company had taken on enormous loans to finance several developments. One project stalled after construction costs increased dramatically. Another faced legal disputes. Then, an important investor withdrew. The company began selling properties to cover its debts. My father reduced staff. My mother sold expensive jewelry. My brother James left his luxury apartment and moved into a smaller place. Olivia stopped posting photographs of expensive vacations. For the first time, the family that had once seemed untouchable was struggling. I learned most of this through news reports and occasional online articles. Daniel never celebrated their problems. One evening, I mentioned what I had read. He looked at me quietly. "Do you want to help them?" I didn't know how to answer. "They didn't help us." "I know. They told me I wasn't their daughter anymore." "I know that too." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Whatever happens, don't let their cruelty change who you are." I looked at him. That was Daniel. He could have hated them. Instead, he simply refused to become like them. Several months later, the situation became much worse. My father's company was close to defaulting on a major loan. According to the financial news, the bank had given him only weeks to find a new investor. Then I heard something that made me sit upright. A private investment group had expressed interest in acquiring a controlling stake in the company. The group was led by one of the country's fastest-growing business leaders. His name appeared across several articles. Daniel. I stared at the screen. My husband had become one of the most powerful businessmen in the industry. My family still had no idea. Then one evening, an email arrived at our home. It was an invitation to a private meeting. My father's company needed funding, and the investor they were desperate to meet was my husband. Daniel placed it on the kitchen counter and looked at me. "You don't have to come." I picked up the envelope. "I am coming." For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to see my family again. I had imagined anger. I had imagined tears. I had even imagined walking away without saying a word. But I had never imagined meeting them like this. On the morning of the meeting, Daniel and I arrived at his company's headquarters. The building was enormous, with glass walls, polished stone floors, and employees moving confidently through the lobby. I remembered the young man who once pushed a cleaning cart through buildings like this. Now his name was engraved beside the entrance. We entered the executive boardroom. Daniel sat at the head of the long table. I sat beside him. A few minutes later, the doors opened. My father walked in first. My mother followed. Then James and Olivia. I hadn't seen them in years. My father looked thinner than I remembered. His expensive suit was still perfectly tailored, but the confidence I had grown up fearing was gone from his face. They were expecting a powerful investor. They weren't expecting us. My father took 2 steps into the room. Then he stopped. His eyes moved from Daniel to me. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My mother covered her mouth. "Emily." I nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. James stared at Daniel. "No." Daniel remained calm. "Hello, James." James looked at my father. "Dad, is this?" My father couldn't finish the sentence. The man he had once called a poor janitor was sitting in front of him as the chief executive of a company powerful enough to rescue his business. My mother slowly approached me. "I didn't know." I looked at her. "You didn't ask." She began crying. My father finally found his voice. "Emily, we didn't know what happened to you." I almost laughed. "You knew exactly what happened to me. You threw me out." His face fell. "We were wrong." Those words were not enough. Not after all those years. Not after the wedding they refused to attend. Not after the night I stood outside our family home with 2 suitcases because my father had decided I was no longer his daughter. My father sat down. His pride had disappeared. "Our company is in serious trouble," he said. "I know. We need an investor." "I know." He looked at Daniel. "We were told you could help." Daniel folded his hands. "I can." My father swallowed. "Please." That single word silenced the room. I had spent years imagining my father asking me for forgiveness. I had never imagined him asking me for help. My mother stepped closer. "We know we hurt you. You didn't just hurt me," I said quietly. "You humiliated me." She lowered her eyes. I looked at James and Olivia. "You all laughed when I chose Daniel." Nobody answered. "You called him worthless because he cleaned offices. You believed money made one person better than another." My voice trembled, but I refused to cry. Then Daniel reached for my hand. He didn't interrupt. He simply held it. My father looked at him. "I owe you an apology." Daniel nodded. "You do." My father looked at me again. "Can you forgive us?" I wasn't ready to answer. Then Daniel leaned toward me and spoke softly. "The decision is yours." He paused. "Do we save them?" I looked across the table at the people who had once turned their backs on me. For years, I had wondered what I would do if our positions were reversed. Now I finally had the answer. I just wasn't sure whether forgiveness meant giving them everything they had lost, or teaching them what they had once refused to understand. I looked at my father for a long time. He was sitting across from me, the same man who had once controlled every decision in our family. Now his hands were trembling. "I need to understand something," I said. "If Daniel were still a janitor, would you be sitting here asking me for help?" My father looked down. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. My mother began crying. "We were wrong, Emily." I looked at her. "You were not simply wrong. You made me choose between the people who raised me and the person I loved." "I know."
No, Mom.
"I don't think you do." I told them about the night they threw me out. I told them how I had stood outside the house with 2 suitcases, wondering whether I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I told them about our tiny apartment, our unpaid bills, and the nights Daniel stayed awake working because he refused to give up. My father listened without interrupting. Then I asked him the question I had carried for years. What exactly was wrong with Daniel? My father finally looked up. Nothing. That answer hurt more than an argument would have. He knew it now. Daniel had been the same man then. The only thing that had changed was his bank account. Daniel stood. "I can save the company," he said. Everyone looked at him. "But I won't simply hand you money." My father nodded. Daniel explained that he would invest enough capital to stabilize the business, protect thousands of employees, and restructure the company's debts. However, he would become the majority shareholder. My father would remain involved, but he would no longer control everything. My father accepted immediately. Then Daniel revealed something that surprised even me. "I agreed to this before today's meeting." I turned toward him. "You did." He smiled. "I couldn't watch innocent employees lose their jobs because of decisions made by a few people." I felt tears fill my eyes. Even after everything my family had done, Daniel wasn't interested in destroying them. He wanted to protect people who had nothing to do with our past. That was the man I had chosen. The company survived. Over the following months, Daniel's team helped restructure the business. Employees kept their jobs. My father's company remained standing, although it was no longer the empire it had once been. My father eventually invited us to the family home. I hesitated before accepting. When I stepped through those doors again, memories came rushing back. But this time, I wasn't carrying suitcases. I was walking beside my husband. My father stood at the entrance. He looked at Daniel, then at me. "I thought I was losing a daughter that day," he said quietly. "I didn't realize I was turning away the best person who ever loved this family." I didn't pretend the past had never happened. Forgiveness didn't erase those years. But I finally understood something. My family had believed wealth determined a person's worth. Daniel had taught me that character was worth far more. The man they mocked as a poor janitor had become a respected businessman, but money was never what made him extraordinary. It was his patience, his courage, his kindness, and his refusal to let rejection turn him bitter. I took my father's hand. "I forgive you," I whispered. Then I looked at Daniel. Years earlier, he had promised me that one day my family would understand why I chose him. He had been right. They finally understood. But by then, I no longer needed their approval. I had already found something far more valuable. A husband who loved me when I had nothing to offer him except my heart. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching the people who hurt you suffer. It's becoming so secure in your own life that their rejection no longer has the power to define you. Never judge a person's worth by their job, family name, bank account, or social status. Character, loyalty, perseverance, and kindness are far more valuable than wealth. Sometimes the person society considers insignificant may become the very person everyone needs someday. And most importantly, don't let rejection turn your heart bitter. Keep building your life, remain kind, and let your success speak for itself. If this story touched your heart, remember that true love is not measured by money, status, or family approval. It is measured by who stays when life becomes difficult. If you enjoyed Emily and Daniel's story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And tell me in the comments, if you were Emily, would you have forgiven your family?